Georgia remains number 1, but the Bulldogs received 20 fewer first-place votes this week. Michigan, Texas, Ohio State, Florida State all received votes as well. Should Georgia have stayed at number 1, if you were a voter, would you have thought about moving them off? Max, let's start with you.
I think I would have, and honestly, standing outside like the media room in Nebraska's facility, waiting for post-game interviews, catching the very end of Auburn, Georgia. Honestly, guys, I kind of did wonder, like, would Georgia just get dropped out of number 1? And we can like debate whether that's an overreaction or whatever. I kind of wondered if Michigan was going to get bumped up to number 1. And I think that if you want to play the resume game, certainly they don't win that game, right? But watching Michigan live, it's a very boring form of dominance. I did not write a story off that game because I just could not figure out what to write about it because it was not very telling about Michigan. But they're really good. They just did whatever they wanted in that game. They did not break a sweat. 0 penalties, 0 turnovers, 1 punt. That's the number 1 defense in stop right now. Like, Nebraska is like hopeless and helpless as I've ever seen them in that game. And Nebraska's not very good, right? But I thought back to 2019 when Ohio State came to town. That team with Justin Fields and Chase Young and J.K. Dobbins, all those guys. They came and lit up Nebraska, and everyone's sort of like, man, that's probably the best Big Ten team we've seen come here. I think Michigan was like, I'm not better than that team maybe, but I kind of think they're on that level. And I also recognize there's nothing they can even do in the month of October to like sell people on that. It's just going to be all about the games in November.
Well, keep beating people 40-7. That helps.
Right.
Well, the thing that is interesting about the whole where would you rank them debate, and it might get to that point once the playoff rankings start getting revealed, is are you a resume person? Are you an eye test person? Are you a combination of both? And I think that if you're playing a bad schedule the way that Michigan is, that the only thing that you can do to maintain that, ranking will be to have games like that where you don't break a sweat. I haven't seen them in person this year. I think that's an interesting thought process, Max, between the 2019 Ohio State team and the current iteration of Michigan. I covered the 2019 Ohio State team, and I think that might have been the best Ohio State team that they've ever had in program history. And a lot of that was the top end talent on that team from like a, first round draft pick status. But I don't know if that Ohio State team was that deep across the board. Like the thing about Michigan is I don't think they have like 5 first round picks, but like everybody on their roster is a draftable player. So like spread out, I still think that could be pretty lethal as well. So I'm excited to see, what Michigan can do and the heights that team can get to. We have a few Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan games coming up. But
also, I thought JJ McCarthy was good. Like I thought he was really good just seeing him live. And the way that team is set up, he doesn't even really have to throw for 200 yards in these games.
That's right.
I mean, I think,
the incredible thing about that, Max, is that he hasn't had to do that against Ohio State either. Like they're built to beat good teams that way as well. But based on what you saw with Georgia on television and what you saw with Michigan, like if you just had to guess right now, throwing darts at nobody knows who the best team in college football is right now. Ranking a top 5, I think, would be an interesting, thought process. Everybody's would be different because everybody ranks teams differently. But is Michigan, in your mind, if you had to guess, with the information that you have, the best team in college football right
now? I almost would be more inclined to go Florida State. Just the way I would look at this stuff. And I'm guessing you guys might too, if you hadn't.
I do. Dave left them out of the top 5, his own top 5 yesterday.
Maybe. Not as a statement about them, but more about a statement about some of the other teams that we've seen. I think if you want to make a case for them as number 1, number 2, number 3, I buy it. I buy it for Florida State.
The thing I like about Florida State is that they have the resume with those 2 wins, and they've also looked sexy as hell. Like I think they have both. I don't know how they could not be in your top 5. But I also understand too.
So you're adjusting down because LSU is not as good as you thought. Is that kind of the?
That is legitimately somewhat of a factor, and then also BC. Like they're really bad, and so you got to show up. Like again, we can talk about we care about teams at their best, but then we're having a Michigan conversation, and part of the reason why Michigan that we're taking them seriously is because they're not winning these games 31-17. They're not winning them 27 14, and they're 10-6 at half. They're just like laying the hammer down on teams. and they're strangling all these offenses, and they just pound you, and then get it across, and then kick it to you, and then dare you to come at them, force you to go 3 and out, do that over and over and over again.
You know what I have the hardest time doing as just a person ranking and thinking about ranking teams is that I am really down on Clemson, right? Clemson is no longer a top 25 team. But I think we all know from people who watch the sport and cover it, and seasoned fans who listen to the show, if you watched Florida State play that Clemson team that day, it's really hard for me to separate what I know Clemson has become and giving Florida State the credit they deserve for winning that specific game. Like, they don't get to call that a top 10 win. They don't even get to call it a top 25 win. But I'd bet anything if I could find the answer to that was a top 10 win.
Well, this is why this goes into the Heisman voting, and this goes into why I don't really like polls, because they sort of like skew conversations. Are we in agreement that Clemson is probably one of the 20 to 25 best teams in the country, perhaps slightly higher, right? They don't have the wins or the resume or any of the things that, they've had somewhat of a tough schedule early on. And, it is what it is. I don't blame voters for not putting them in our top 25. But if we're living in the real world here and not sort of voting as we have to vote so that we don't have 10,000 people banging down our doors for, why'd you have this team over this team or this team over this team?
It's too many undefeated teams right now to put
I get it. But also,
sure.
Clemson's one of the 20 best teams in the country right now. Right. So, I think that will bear itself out over time, which gets into some of the things we talk about on Saturday night, where it's like, I mostly care about top 25 wins on the back, at the end of the season, because that's the full picture. I do not care at all of what a team was ranked when you beat them. That's.
Yeah, and I think the good news is that as, teams start to lose and maybe Clemson catches a little bit of heat, then that will be represented when we're ranking Florida State when it matters. So,
can I say something potentially really dumb? I think if you were playing like Michigan, Georgia tomorrow, I would almost lean Michigan, because I think they're a little bit more of a finished product today. That's not saying Georgia can't get where they're going to, I'm sure they're going to end up by the end of this season. And that's not to say Michigan has no flaws and nothing to improve on here over the next 2 months. It's not just as simple as you got to show up and stay healthy. But I think that Michigan team has got a lot figured out. And it's kind of weird that we're not going to see any. I mean, could they end up in some of those BC type games like you mentioned, David? Probably. I mean, there's it's going to be a long month ahead. But I think they've got, from an identity standpoint and just experience standpoint, they definitely know what they are.
I almost wonder, and this might sound silly, but when you only have the two big time games, and we got to get through this 2 months where we're not going to have a marquee game, there's almost nothing to look ahead to, right? You're not going to look ahead to a game 5-6 weeks in the future. It's like, okay, this week we're going to demolish, Nebraska. This week we're going to demolish, Bowling Green or whatever. But I'm with you, Max. I think Georgia, for all the pieces that they're replacing, I mean, I think Michigan might beat Georgia by, double digits if they played tomorrow. By November, that might change, because Michigan has already been through all this. They didn't replace a ton. And obviously Georgia's talent is what Georgia's talent is. But right now, I'm totally with you on this with Michigan.
I wrote a column for tomorrow that I'm not going to tell you the premise of, because we can't get into this debate on the show tonight. But there are certain questions in the column that I want to read off as it pertains to what we get to look forward to, which is which team is going to emerge from the Pac-12? Will it be USC, Oregon, or Washington? Which team is going to win the Big Ten East? Will Michigan keep its stranglehold on that side of the conference? Will Ohio State reemerge as the conference's dominant program, or is Penn State for real? Will Alabama rise from the ashes and emerge from its division in a year where the SEC is down? Or will Georgia just win it again? And can Texas shock the world and actually emerge from the Big 12 before bolting for the SEC? And are we undervaluing Oklahoma? There are legitimately 10 different programs.
Sounds like you did just read your column mock test, but keep going.
No, those are I read those that section. You don't know what the premise is.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. But I use that section to just try to reiterate that there are 10 teams right now that I think you can make a legitimate case could win the national championship this year, which is something, if you've ever listened to anything I've ever said on the show, to be saying that on October 1st and not be looking at the 247 Sport composite rankings is a tremendous amount of personal growth that I will pat myself on the back for.